keep a hold of those. Note cards. So, last class, we talked about our what we know about William Shakespeare, what plays that we've read for him, or from him. We've read some of his sonnets in this class. But it seemed that we weren't super familiar with his plays. Like we'd heard of some, maybe we read selections of some, maybe we'd read one or two. But we weren't super familiar. So how did this reading go? This first act of Macbeth, what do you think, Jacob?
It was really hard to understand the first time.
Okay. Do you think that was because you started out too fast?
I started out reading it.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Nathan, you had your hand up?
I was going to say that. I found it kind of confusing. Like, it was hard to follow what was going on just because it's like old English.
Ah. Thank you for mentioning that. It is not Old English.
Or Shakespearean.
So William Shakespeare wrote in what is called early modern English. Okay. Or this is now its kind of technical term. It used to be called Elizabethan English and still is, depending on the linguist you're talking to. But when we think about the English language, right? That's what we speak. What type or what would we call the type of English that we speak? You know, we speak modern English. Modern English has been around since around 1550. All right, can anyone tell me the dates for Queen Elizabeth, the Elizabethan era? Carter?
Elizabethan era was 1558 to 1600.
There you go. So now you see why Elizabethan English, right? But we can peg it around 1550. This is where, when we resolve font and spelling, it's pretty easy, or not pretty easy. It is possible for modern English speakers to read without translation, right? Really, the biggest problem that gets in the way is font, because they had some, if you look, you will see that there is, you have this letter. What's that letter? An F. The F would also be written like this. The F would all, and then you would have another letter, which would be written like this. This would be, it's an S. You also have this, an S. And it depends on where in the word it comes, if it's at the beginning, if it's at the end, if it's in the middle, which one you use, but it leads to misreading, even contemporaneous misreadings between especially these two, right? The two form, the F and the S. But before modern English came what type of English? Oh yeah, but that would be a part of modern English. One that April with his sure sota, the drucht of March hath pierced it to the rota. That is early English. I think someone said it. Canterbury Tales was written in Middle English. Middle English really ended around, or we can peg the date at 1500, right? Ish, right? So that's a big old circa right there. Started in 1066. What happened in 1066? Battle of Hastings. Very good. What happened at the Battle of Hastings? Right. So, 1066, you have, you have Edward II dies in January. You have a short war of succession. Harold Godwinson, I think Godwinson becomes king. All of a sudden, a bunch of Vikings invade. So he marches his army up into the north, defeats the Vikings, and then he has to march all the way south to Hastings, and he covers like 150 miles in 2 days or something. After fighting a battle, shows up, there's William of Normandy with a fresh army, fresh off the boat. They wipe out the English army. William of Normandy becomes King of England. Yay. What this means, and then they systematically replace all the nobility in England and then eventually Ireland with French nobility. So all the nobility are going to be speaking what? French. But all the peasants still speak English, their form of English. So, and you see this, this happens at the beginning of this period and earlier. We'll see you have in a city, everyone is speaking French. Because to do business, you have to speak French. To deal with the government, you have to speak French. To deal with the clergy, and at least in the cities, you're going to have to be speaking French. So the people in the cities are speaking French. Now, the people that live around the cities, kind of in the countryside, they are going to be able to speak French and English because they have to deal with the people in the cities and they have to deal with the people that live in the very rural areas that only speak English, right? Because these are your farmers, your hunters, your woodsmen, etc. They trade with these guys, and these guys trade in the city. So, over the course of 150-ish years, you have, right, because when were the Canterbury Tales written? Yeah, Chaucer lived in the 1300s, 1360-ish, if memory serves. Literally haven't looked at his dates in a year. And so you have, interestingly enough, so you have the French nobility only speaking French, but they have kids, and those kids learn French and English, right? And those are called the Anglo-Normans. The Anglo-Normans. And they're speaking two languages, but everyone speaks these two languages, so they start trading in between those two languages, moving back and forth. Eventually, you get a bunch of French injected into English, and you get Middle English. Now, before Middle English came, everybody, Old English. Very good. Or Anglo-Saxon. So Old English goes from, let's say, 450 to 1066. So circa 450 to 1066. Okay? Now, Old English. What cometh in reach of, right? It sounds a lot like what modern language? Not French. What? German. Because their German is descended from a cousin of Anglo-Saxon, or what's now called Old English. So, to understand what happens here, the era that comes before is called the Romano-Celtic period. And the Romano-Celtic period, 50 BC to 400. Again, circus. So the Romans conquer Britain. Julius Caesar in the 50s crosses the English Channel, and he's like, I made it. And then he turns around and leaves because he has to go, take over Rome and then get assassinated. You know the deal. You know what happened. But then in, 20, 25 years later, the Romans are like, hey, you remember that island that was full of, untapped natural resources? Let's go take that over and steal all their stuff, because that's what empires do. And so they did, and they conquered up to Hadrian's Wall, right? That separated England from Scotland, essentially. Right? Hadrian's Wall, is that right? Trajan's Wall?
No. Trajan built an island building. Hadrian did.
Anyway, so the same thing that happened in Middle English happened here, except instead of French, it was Latin. And instead of English, it was whatever Germanic language the native peoples were speaking. Right? And it was probably some variation of Celtic, because about 200 years before the Romans showed up, the Irish invaded, people from Ireland invaded the island of England and killed a bunch of people and took over. So there's been quite a bit of invasion and death on the old Isle, in the British Isles. So what happens in 476? Oh, be brave with this one. The fall of Rome. Now, long before the fall of Rome, Roman Empire began pulling troops out from its provinces that were far away, right? So England is one of the first places that gets troops pulled out. So the Roman administrators, bureaucrats, soldiers, etc., get pulled back, right? Rome is constricting. And so what does that mean? Okay, more freedom. What else does it mean? Right? But the people living there, who has just left? All the people with the weapons, all the soldiers, all the people that were keeping the invaders out. Now, who lives north of England, north of the island of Britain? They ride in boats and have long beards and shields. The Vikings! At least early Vikings. And the Vikings are like, oh, look! We have this island. All the soldiers have left. Also, oh, what have they built along the coastlines? What are these buildings called? Churches? What are these churches filled with? Gold? Who lives in these churches? Pacifists? Awesome. Let's go take the gold. They're not Christians. They don't care. They're just like, hey, look, Super Duty Walmart. And so they go, they invade, and they just start wiping people out. So some people living in, so it's kind of a dual thing of some of the Vikings going, man, the weather is really nice here. It's not always frozen and desolate. Let's move here. So they do. There is also some Vikings move there because they're invited there. Because the people that are living there say, hey, we'll give you land along the coast if you fight the people that keep raiding our shores. And they're like, the weather is nice. And it's very fertile ground. So let's move there. But then they move there and they go, wait a minute, why aren't we in charge? So they take over. So they take over. And there was Latin within the English being spoken, but not a whole lot because the Romans kept themselves very segmented. So it was this process, but not as extreme. So then the Anglo-Saxons come in, they tear stuff up, they get in charge, and you get what becomes Old English. And what was written in Old English? Beowulf. I love Beowulf. It's so good. So we are right here, right after the switchover between Middle and Modern English. So we're in Modern English, but it's early modern. It's still different from us. And that's why some of you are having difficulty with it. Because, I mean, some of the vocabulary is going to be archaic, but also some of the sentence structure is still retaining that Middle English sentence structure. And there's really no punctuation rules yet, so it's kind of a shotgun approach. Question.
So, in modern day English has some German and French mixed into it. There's a lot of.
So, the current composition of modern English is about 60% Latin based, with about half of that coming from Latin and half of that coming from French. There is about 15 to 20% from other languages. And then the remainder is Germanic. But if you look at the most commonly used words, about 80% of the most commonly used words in English are Germanic based or Germanic in origin. Now, why would that be, do you think? It's an interesting question. Jacob? Well, the common words are Germanic. The simple words, the monosyllabic words, the single syllable words are going to be Germanic. All of our swear words are Germanic in origin. Who speaks in single syllable words and has a tendency to swear? Okay.
Scottish people.
Think about it in terms of class. The commoners. The common people. Is that what you said? Okay. You're correct. He is very funny looking. I mean, just funny. So you have this situation where, right, mom, dad, and, right, a lot of these single syllable words are Germanic in origin. Pig, cow, a lot of our words for farm animals are going to be Germanic in origin. That's what I was about to say. So from a cow, you get beef, which comes from the French beef. From pigs, you get pork. Right. Chicken is actually really interesting because it's like, oh, you eat chicken. But there's another name for chicken, another winged birds. Yeah, poultry, right? And that's the French word. You hunt deer to get venison. Now, what's interesting about that one is that it has only recently gained the specific definition of meat from a deer. Venison used to be any hunted meat. So it could be rabbit, it could be hog or bear, anything. You hunted it, it wasn't a bird, it was venison. That's an archaic usage. Now, why? So let's take the example of cow. So you have a cow, and from a cow you get beef. Now, why would we not say, well, I would like to get some ground cow to make a cow burger. Of course, hamburger comes from the German city of Hamburg. Jake?
The nobility, the people who spoke the French, were the ones who were
Yeah, the people that raised the animal called it a cow. The people that ate the animal called it beef.
Is beef just the French word for cow?
They called it beef, right? So then
Would they say
the
like,
food version becomes beef, even though the animal version is still cow.
would they say that's like you see a cow like, oh that's a cool beef.
I mean, yeah, the French, yes,
Yeah.
because that's, you know, their word for it.
At least it's called.
Now, here's a fun fact, just for your edification. So you have 3 female cows. You would refer to them as a group of cows, right? Let's say you have 3 males, intact males. Would be bulls, right? And if they are no longer intact, they would be steers, right? Steers are castrated bulls. But let's say you have a group of both males and females, and you want to refer to the group as a whole, you would say that is a group of, yes, in the common parlance, but if you want to be specific, you would say beeves. Because cows would indicate they're all female, but they're not all female, right? There's some males in there. And you could say cattle, and that's another way we've done it. But the technical term is beeves. That's just some trivia for you all. All right, any other questions on this? Short history of English. Okay. Any other first impressions? Any other first impressions? It's okay, we're only 1/5 of the way through.
I wasn't sure about the question. The third question that you asked, like, what's Max doing?
All right, well, we're going to talk about it.
Cool.
So no more first impressions? You were just confused by the language? Okay, so the play Macbeth was most likely first performed in 1606. And it was most likely first performed for King James in Buckingham Palace. And then it was performed in the Globe Theatre. There is significant evidence that Macbeth was written specifically for James, due to a number of specific references to him in his life and all of these things. One of the biggest ones is there was a popular conception during the reign of King James that he was a descendant of Banquo. Right, and who is Banquo?
The dude who was said his children.
It's Macbeth's best friend, and the prophecy to him is his descendants will be king, even though he won't be. Look, King James is king. Oh, it's true. Oh, cool. Right, and James had a pretty high opinion of himself, so super rad, right? You also have in the first scene, there is Foul and Foul is Fair. Who shows up?
Witches.
A bunch of witches, specifically 3 witches. Now, King James had a fascination with witches. In fact, before he became King of England in the 1580s, he was involved in the prosecution and execution of witches in Scotland who were accused of plotting to put a curse on him. He was so interested in witches that in 1604 he published a book about witches and witchcraft. Where the king found time to write a book, I don't know. but he was that into it. So this was like his thing, right? You have, with the witches being present and all of that stuff, he's going to be like into it, right? Like if you're into laser guns, any sci-fi movie, you're going to be like interested in. It's going to have to make you lose your interest. The other thing is the length. Macbeth, Carter. Macbeth is a very short play. It has a very short run time. It's quick. There's a lot of action, not a lot of standing around and talking about your feelings. And this is, people think, or scholars think, that this was because James had a nasty habit of falling asleep during plays, and that would be super embarrassing. So Shakespeare didn't want that to happen. So there's a lot of sword fights, a lot of blood, a lot of action going on stage. There's a lot of people that die on stage in this play. It's very exciting.
Wait, actually?
Yes, they murdered people every performance. Right, Ryan?
That's not true.
Every time you go
Good job, Sherlock.
Good job, Carter. Well, I know the Romans did.
Kind of a legit question though, because it was dangerous.
Well, these are the Romans.
You already said they didn't use real blood, just catch it.
They all use lightsabers. Now, what type of play? So, talked about 3 different types of plays that Shakespeare wrote, and those were tragedy, comedy, history. Which of those is Macbeth? It is a tragedy. So we know it's going to be violent and full of death. But what's interesting is that Macbeth was a real person. He was actually King of Scotland for a time. He actually usurped the throne to Scotland. But Shakespeare takes some liberties. Macbeth ruled for about 11 years, and by all accounts, his rule was not so bad. It was pretty peaceful and nice. We'll see how Macbeth's rule of Scotland goes here, because he does become king. Spoiler. But it's a tragedy. In tragedies, things end poorly. Right? Well, this is something that Shakespeare does. He had a, from a guy named Holinshed, wrote, it's called Chronicles of Scotland and England, Chronicles of the Kings of Scotland and England, something like that. It was a history book, by their time. And that was Shakespeare's main source for like his main historical reference. And he would use historical figures as kind of the inspiration to write plays, right? Like we're going to read Hamlet next. There was a Prince Hamlet. It was a Prince of Denmark. If you ever read King Lear, there was a King Lear, and he did split his kingdom between 3 of his daughters, and it ended just as poorly. So a lot of those, a number of the tragedies and a number of the great tragedies have historical bases. It's kind of like based on a true story, though. Like you see, some horror movie, it's based on a true story, and you're like, okay, someone heard something fall in their closet, and that's what you're basing this on. So yeah, very, very loosely based on a very loosely true story. If you look at it at a certain angle. What? Well, that's what the commercials say. I've never seen the film. I have no desire to.
Is it horror movie?
Yeah.
So, that's some background for the play, and we'll talk about some more stuff as they come up as we read. Now, to our first, turn to Act 1, Scene 1. Ryan, you can be the first witch. Lauren, you can be the second witch. Christina, you can be the third witch. So, Let's read the first scene.
A
Shall
desert
we-
place. That's what you said, right? What's the first scene?
No, we're going to read the first scene.
Oh,
Brian.
When shall we three meet again? In thunder, lightning, or rain?
When the hurly-burly's done, and the battle's lost and won,
That will be Aaron said.
Where the place?
upon the heath.
There to meet with Macbeth.
I come, Grey Malkin.
But it calls, there's foul and foul is there, through the fog of the air.
Very good. Fair is foul, and foul is fair. Oh, very interesting. Fair is foul, and foul is fair. So this is the literary device of what? It's a form of, yeah, antithesis. And antithesis is a type of what? Parallelism. Yeah, antithesis. But it's equating, it's saying fair equals foul. Foul equals fair. Now, what is meant by fair? Like the state fair? I mean, the state fair can be kind of foul. It smells pretty bad, man, by the animal.
Like you have fair hair.
You're not Leah. I called on Leah. Yeah, the fair things. And then it would be the foul things. So things that are fair will now seem to be foul, and things that are foul will now seem to be fair. So, what are the witches doing? Yeah, they're reversing the order of things. So, this line, fair is foul and foul is fair, it's quite famous. I'm sure you've heard it before. But it's also, or I consider it to be, the thesis of the play. This is going to be the through line for the entire play. That which seems fair is actually foul. And that which seems foul is actually fair. Now, what is from this scene? What do we know is going on? Lauren, you read this.
They're gonna go meet him. Okay.
Yes, they will. For that, when the
In the what? The battle?
when the hurly burly is done, the battle's lost. So what's going on right now? A battle, right? There's a fight. There's a war going on. There's a war on. So they're like, all right, when these people are done fighting each other, let's go mess with them. That's what they're planning on doing. That's their plan. But we see how here, even at the beginning, the witch is reversing the order of things. We're going to see the effect that that has on the rest of the action of the play. Now, another note. Where they're going to meet Macbeth is on the heath, right, or on the moors. We remember Beowulf. Where does Grendel come from to attack Heorot? Comes loping in off the... Yeah, but he's coming off the moors, right? He's this monster that lives out in the wilderness, and he's coming to civilization to wreck civilization, right? If you want to read the attack of Grendel on Heorot in like a cosmic sense, that's what's going on. But here we see how Macbeth will be out in the wilderness, and he will be confronted by the Weird Sisters, right? That's another name for the witches, right? And weird can also be, it's a Scots word. One of the translations for it is wild. It's also where we get weird, our word for weird, like strange or odd. It's a much watered down sentiment. But Macbeth out in the wilderness, and he will encounter the creatures that live out in the wilderness. They're usually up to no good. Right? Okay, questions on that? Yes.
Weirdness.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that. So we get, we see it as weird, which is from word, W-Y-R-D, which if used kind of in a proper noun sense, it's going to be fate, like fate or destiny. But it can also be, this word can also be wayward, or
So like, wait,
what?
nothing.
There's another one. I found a note. Because there's another word it could be, because yes, that is the noise I was making. Thank you. Here we go. So the first place Macbeth, the play, is published is in the First Folio in 1623. First Folio is the first collection of Shakespeare's plays that were printed, and that's the text that's used for these. And the word in the text is weird. And so it could be weird, it could be wayward. So then if it's, well, what's probably happening is Shakespeare wants you to see both, right? Wants you to see wayward and weird. It's like wayward is in like a stray. Because they are, scary witches. And the idea of witches in Britain at this time was usually women, though sometimes men, but usually women who had rejected the Christian faith and had, thrown in their lot with the devil. So they were literally wayward. And then they would do that to get magic powers. That's kind of the idea. So, any other questions? All right, let's take a break. We'll resume in 5 minutes. You have a question?